Hi, welcome back. I would like to thank for the opportunity of being here, to thank and congratulate the organization. So far, it has been really interesting. I have the pleasure to start my name is Maria Coutinho. I have the pleasure to start the panels during this conference, which is also a very interesting space in the sense that it's a possibility to have contact with the new researchers, new outseeings of what is being done a bit across the world, which would be the case of our panel. And I'm also very pleased to present Joana Passi, our first speaker of this panel. Joana is an artist researcher with a solid background on arts, painting and mastering visual arts from the University of Rio de Janeiro. Also has complementation courses in art history, studio practice in Montreal, which, as we will see afterwards, give her a solid background on visual studies, image studies, and it would be very interesting to see it reflected on her presentation. Besides, she's currently an artist researcher. That's how she defines herself in the PUC in Rio de Janeiro. But we have the luck of having her with us here in Portugal. She's staying a research day at Colégio das Artes in the University of Coimbra. There's also another important aspect that I want to refer to regarding Joana Passi small bio, which has to do with her female condition. And apparently this would be just a circumstantial reference or a side reference, but it is not. It interpeals directly with her work and has to do with what she's going to present us here, talking about ghosts in the sense of the condition, the ontology of being a female woman. And it's very interesting. I'm really looking forward to hear her. And as you can see from the resume, she's going to present a reflection that we'll conduct to Letícia Parente's work. And we can also pick up something from Bertolo's intervention this morning. And we are going to talk about the memory of objects and how the memory of the objects can transform, can be a space of revolution, of thinking, of dealing with the ghosts that haunt women throughout history. Is this correct?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joana. Good luck.
For this introduction. And thank you, the Spring Seminar, also for conceding me this space for my talk. And my presentation, I will quickly start. My presentation will concentrate on how Letícia Parente's video art, shot in the domestic realm in the year range of 1975 and 1982, in form of a struggle to defeat an angel. A struggle implied in the act of killing a phantom, as described on Virginia Woolf's account of how she became a writer. Woolf's essay, Professions for Women, where she talks about killing the angel of the house, was presented to a public of workers at the London's National Society for Women's Service in 1931. The main point of her paper is an observation about the struggle women have to go through to defeat phantoms and actual beings that haunts their thoughts and imprisons their bodies, preventing them from having free will, freedom of thought, and success. Woolf concentrates on an image of a phantom based on the angel in the house borrowed from Coventry Patmore's poem of the 19th century, a sort of elegy to ideal housewife, and unfolds on the efforts that women have to go through to recognize and kill this angel throughout time, as long as they live in patriarchal societies. I will introduce Letícia Parente by screening the video task 1. Yes. I'll introduce Letícia Parente by screening the video task 1 from 1982 and by bringing a brief context on which her work was made. As a mother, a science professor, and an artist, as Gillian's Need notes in the article Disciplinary and the Domestic, Parente confronted the working mother's classic challenge, striking a balance between her career and her duties at home, and at a time when there were still very few mothers who were also professionals in Brazil. Paradoxically, Letícia Parente was born on July 1930, a year before Woolf stood in the Women's League to reflect on professions for women. She had access to an intellectual working class, upper middle class bourgeois elite social stratum. She was a multifaceted mother of five, professor, artist, writer, and chemist. Early in her life, she was part of the youth Catholic left-wing movement, one that opposed to the military coup that took place in Brazil in 1964. By the 70s, Parente was already a successful scientist, living in a society governed by excessive police-military force, one that commanded ways of behavior and creation during the Brazilian dictatorship that lasted from 1964 until 1985. It was a time when the government had leave to surveil all spheres of public and private spaces, invading households and taking control of the body by means of torture. A period when disobedience was punished by death and disappearance. Altogether, the government aimed to control the totality of ideas and actions, to erase the untamed, and to impose the conservative way of life based on the family tradition common to Occidental Jewish Catholic societies. In this configuration, a set of postures and activities were reserved for the dutiful and submissive women present in the initiation of the housewife. In an interpretation of Parente's work through a feminist reading, Need summarizes where the artist stands relative to a social power relation order concerning gender and race. While women's role in Latin America, quoting Need, in Latin American society underwent many changes during the late 70s, some values remained constant, such as Marianism, the cult of motherhood associated with the suffering of Virgin Mary, and the natural responsibilities of housework and child raising. Military governments across South America emphasized these traditional roles. And despite the dictatorship's conservative emphasis on women's domestic roles, its economic policies of the mid and late 70s paradoxically helped middle-class, mainly white women to find work outside home. While middle-class women were still largely responsible for managing the households, new activities also became available to them, including professional occupations outside the house. However, these opportunities were made possible to them with the help of low-paid domestic servants who were usually women of color, as mentioned Aracide Amaral in 1993. It was against this conflicted historical, racial, and economic background that Parente reflected on the shifting attitudes towards women and the roles in the homes and workspace in their video performances. Though Parente was complicit on one level with the kinds of structural forces that have historically exploited women of color and domestic laborers and maintained the marginalized position, she was among the first to bring the question of race into art discourse around women's domestic work and patriarchal disciplinary structures in the domestic sphere. Close quote. André Parente's sons, who also took part in some of her videos, in personal communication, noted that she did not consider herself a feminist. However, he affirms that her acts dealt directly with a critical approach to domestic space, household objects, quotidian cause, through pointing out its dimensions of oppression, incarceration, and violence. I'm sorry. This act in Preparation 1 from 1975 of getting ready and doing makeup is disrupted to serve as a political commentary. As we see Parente's face and her double reflected on the mirror, and we see a third face coming up as she subverses, we see, sorry, I got lost in the sentence, so just repeat. We see Parente's face and her double reflect on the mirror, and we see a third face coming up as she subverts the act of putting lipstick and painting her eyes by creating a sort of blinding and silencing mask. Philippe Scovino notes that the constitution of this face, mask, is the possibility of understanding herself, her place in the world, but substantially, rhizomatically amplifying a political position in the world, close quote. Another face is mocked up, to be carried around the house, to practice everyday course, or to be presented in a social event or a workspace. A common everyday routine of dressing up to go out, particular to the female universe, is dislocated to give place to the strangeness and weary aspect of a made-up, dysfunctional eye and mouth, or one that maybe established new functions. The makeup, instead of highlighting her facial expressions, blinds and silences her. On the other hand, the mask has its revealing side. Approaching Parente's work by Deleuze and Guattari's concept of faciality, Scovino points out that in no case is the mask used to conceal, to hide, even showing or revealing. The mask ensures the institution to enhance the institution, the enhancement of the face, the faciality of the head and body, close quote. We hear the mechanical noise of the camera and the ambient sound, the absence of editing and rhythm imposed by the real-time shooting, along with low-quality images, opens to the viewer a precarious and misplaced space of a voyeuristic point of view, as invaders of one's private space. There is a theatrical atmosphere provoked not by the performance made for the camera, as Parente does not face or address the viewer at any moment, but by the explicit performative act of making a statement through image. Bringing back the angel of the house, I will now give voice to Woolf and outline this phantom with fragments from her essay. I will describe her, starting to quote Woolf, I will describe her as shortly as I can. She was intensely sympathetic. She was immensely charming. She was utterly unselfish. She excelled in the difficult arts of family life. She sacrificed herself daily. If there was chicken, she took the leg. If there was a draught, she sat in it. In short, she was so constituted that she never had a mind or a wish of her own, but preferred to sympathize always with the minds and wishes of others. Above all, I need not say she was pure. Her purity was supposed to be her chief beauty, her blushes, her great grace. In those days, the lives of Queen Victoria, every house had its angel. And when I came to write, I encountered her with the very first words. The shadow of her wings fell upon my page. I heard the rustling of her skirts in the room. I took my pen in my hand to review that novel by a famous man. She slipped behind me and whispered, "My dear, you are a young woman. You are writing about a book that has been written by a man. Be sympathetic, be tender, flatter, deceive. Use all the arts and wiles of our sex. Never let anybody guess that you have a mind of your own. Above all, be pure." And she made us to guide my pen. I now record the one act for which I take some credit for myself. I turned upon her and caught her by the throat. I did my best to kill her. My excuse, if I were to be held up in the court of law, would be that I acted in self-defense. Had I not killed her, she would have killed me. She would have plucked the heart out of my writing. She died hard. Her fictional nature was of great assistance to her. It is far harder to kill a phantom than a reality. She was always creeping back when I thought I had dispatched her. Though I flatter myself that I killed her in the end, the struggle was severe. But it was a real experience. It was an experience that was bound to befall all women writers at that time. Killing the angel in the house was part of the occupation of a woman writer. These were two of the adventures of my professional life. The first, killing the angel in the house. I think I solved. She died. But the second, telling the truth about my own experience as a body, I do not think I solved, close quote. On both universes evoked here, wolves and parentes, we find a body exposed, open to reflect on itself, on its own flesh. The battles they fight to resist and criticize orders of violence, domination, and I'm sorry. It was meant to be. I forgot to change the slide, I'm sorry. On both universes evoked here, wolves and parentes, we find a body exposed, open to reflect on itself, on its own flesh, the battles they fight to resist and criticize orders of violence, domination, and of the ideal female figure. These reflections of the implications drawn over the female body has the potential of producing a multiplicity of other bodies that denounce the atmospheres and structures of their own time. Parentes' experiments with her body around the house open other senses to the domestic sphere. Her body appears fragmented in situations of pain and danger, as we see also happening in the work Northeast, where she handles a snake, and in Trademark, where she stitches with thread needle the words "Made in Brazil" on the sole of her foot. She extends herself and integrates her body into objects and spaces, creating species of chimeras. Commonplace uses of household elements is subverted, resulting in the displacement and transubstantiation of everyday spaces and objects into political images. On the video in, Parente uses the wardrobe as a sort of frame. The camera is facing straight at a closed door, to then be opened by Parente to reveal an empty closet. The atmosphere of a suspension of time resembles the atmosphere provoked by the background sound in real-time shooting, as in Preparation 1 and Task 1. Parente walks into the wardrobe and hangs herself. There's an intertwining of senses produced by this act that navigates in the universe of the children's game of hiding in the closet, bizarrely confronted with the act of suicide by hanging. There is a tight frame, and the closed doors also introduce a claustrophobic atmosphere of imprisonment and disappearance. It needs note that Parente's absurd act appears to reference torture and imprisonment. Open quote. She performs a commonplace act turned macabre, and thus invites a reading of the work as a critique of the dictatorship. One of the most infamous torture methods of the Brazilian dictatorship was to leave prisoners hanging upside down from a pole for hours, with the heels and wrists tied together, close quote. The medium of video art had the potentiality of being produced in a private domestic sphere, supposedly protected from the surveillance of the state. Most of Parente's videos were sent to galleries abroad by mail, not circulating significantly in the dominant art scene of her time, but by being restricted to an underground, alternative, more restricted public, one that could, in a certain dimension, be safe from persecutions and censorship. At the time Parente started to produce her videos, echoes from the whispers of the phantoms known to hunt women overlapped with the echoes of the authoritarian, repressive, and violent regime, echoes of torture, disappearance, and surveillance. The loud and blatant strains of living in a dictatorship overcame the whispers from the angel that, however, never ceased to haunt. His needs points out, for instance, quoting Annabella Geiger, an artist contemporary to Letícia Parente, that there was not space for that kind of feminism that happened in the States. We were struggling against dictatorship. What can you say about feminist art in Brazil? There isn't such a thing. That was Geiger in a personal communication to his need. Close quote. The intention of bringing together Wolf and Parente's universe, separate in a chronological history, but sharing specters rooted in oppressive states, each in the particular dimension, is to use the image of an angel as a sort of mirror, a specular surface, through which we can glance at structures, body and forms, imposed to women artists in patriarchal environments and societies of all times. Perceiving Parenti's work as the remains of a battle to kill the angel of the house points also at a dimension of the image as a species of counterform, in other words, as a residual element from its history of resistance to oppression, violence, and destruction. Following Wolf's call, at all time, women should be alert to identifying and killing angels that whispers in their ears what they should write, how they should eat, sit, and what they should say. An angel that never ceases to reappear as a spectre that never dies, and finds new forms and bodies over and over, trying to pluck out the heart, and may I add, the guts, the flesh, the blood, the skin, out of writings and other forms of art. This presentation is an experiment to bring together fragments that together may arouse a debate about new dimensions to the domestic after this exceptional period we're living in, and we lived and are still living in, and recognizing the constraint that still falls over gender power relation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joana, for your presentation. We will postpone the questions and reflections and some conversation on it. So we will having Andrés Azzolina now. Andrés is a multimedia artist. He's currently living in Lisboa, Lisbon. He studied filmmaking in Mexico, in UNAM. He made an interesting thesis project with film, exploring a notion of the non-linear narrative and the role of cinema in today's multimedia environment, which somehow connects with what he's going to present us afterwards. He has also worked as a creative director, co-founder of ASCO, a social media-based company in Mexico, and he also produced a variety of video series between didactic, informative intention, which I found very stimulating, and currently studying his master's degree in multimedia art in Faculdade de Belas Artes of the University of Lisbon. And his project is around the relationship between precisely ghosts and media. So today, Andrés is going to talk about, well, you can see that in the abstract. What I found interesting was that after Bertolo's intervention this morning and after the ghost dance, the reference of the modern technology of images enhances the power and the possibilities of ghosts, which really tackles what you're going to talk about. The idea of indexicality, spectral effect that is permeated or is part of the pixelization of digital images. So I'm leaving you, you have your microphone here.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I would want to start saying that this is a work in progress, so I don't have, nothing I'm going to say is final, and I'm very much open for feedback. So yeah, Ghost Communication is a transmedia project that aims to produce a framework to understand our current relationship with images in the context of human-induced extinction. Some questions that were asked during this research were, what are the epistemological foundations for the non-human perspective? What is the relationship between ghosts and media? Is it possible to elaborate a non-human analysis of the human narrative? Can ghosts help us understand a way out of our modern cycle of destruction? How can ghost communication take place? Ghosts as an object of study can be often very elusive. Their key characteristic is partial or even non-presence. They are always and or both and. It is in their nature to go against linear thought. They have been around since the beginning of culture, but have always contained an experience that goes beyond human understanding. This form of being as otherness is in fact very relevant nowadays to understand images and technologies. Ghosts can be traced back to the origins of visual representation. It is a common interpretation for prehistoric cave paintings that images served a ritual or magical purpose. Gombrich claims that cave paintings representing animals helped hunters obtain power over their prey, as if images were connected in some way to the soul. Contemporary semiotics would explain this magical relationship with the image as an example of the bilateral sign, a signifier that is unable to contain the wholeness of the signified. In this sense, the image attempts to capture something from the animal, in the example of the cave, that is beyond its physical form. This attempt, the performance of the symbol, is revealing a fully developed cosmotechnique. According to Yokhoi, cosmotechnics can be understood as a pairing of cosmology and technical devices that emerge from turning the environment into a milieu and eventually rationalizing it. In the case of the cave paintings, the cave itself is no longer a natural location, but it is now a place, which is a technical device. However, the ritual aspect of the symbolic performance reveals a central device that fully rounds up the cosmotechnic aspect of the cave painting, that is, the idea of a soul. We can think of the emergence of the idea of a soul as a technological event crucial for the development of culture. It implies an understanding of the existence of otherness and a dimension beyond. It is through the soul that a divide is created between experience and meaning, and therefore language and information are produced. In this sense, symbols emerge not only from human will and intention, but also very much from their environment manifesting into the human experience. However, an important element of cosmotechnics, as it is very much dependent on location, is the idea of a multiplicity of technologies. Sure, the soul may be a constant technology in the emergence of language and culture, but the relationship that this produces with the environment could vary from milieu to milieu. To note this is very important, as it would help us understand modernity as a technological framework that could be eventually unraveled, since it is not all-encompassing, nor it is determining the way technologies could develop further. So how can ghost communication take place? First, I would want to point out the difference between the soul and ghosts. Accounts of ghosts date back to the earliest forms of civilization, and we usually find them through the appearance of the undead or the presence of souls of deceased persons or deities. Considering the example of the cave paintings, ghosts are not necessarily the actual souls of the animals represented, but a phenomena of the performance of symbols. In this excess of experience that the signifier is unable to contain from the signified, there is a free-flowing element of ambiguity that haunts the process of representation. Ghosts are not necessarily souls. They have more to do with the fluidity with which they move beyond our grasp. In this sense, ghosts are not necessarily unified entities, but excess of meaning that circles through the earth due to the reverberation of symbolic performance. As words fail to contain the wholeness of experience, there is something that remains left out of the range of language, but has been summoned by the desire of communication. Ghosts are the echo of intentions. And here I wanted to note something that was mentioned in the film earlier, that Kafka said that he did not like letters because he considered that while a letter travels, for example, if it contains a letter that contains a kiss, He said that while it traveled, the keys would be lost by the ghosts of the letter. And this is sort of what I mean by reverberation. So as information travels, it leaves a trace of itself on its way. So this could explain why ghosts are usually believed to carry a message, either revenge from actions in the past or omens from the future. The ambiguity they produce with time is also a key element inherent to their nature. Ghosts can also be understood as glimpses of further dimensions of time that challenge our linear perception. José Luis Brea, in his book Las Tres Eras de la Imagen, describes the way the development of images from material-based to film to digital has shifted cosmologies over time, and therefore subjectivities, politics, etc. It is very interesting the way he describes the current state of digital images as spectres due to their ubiquity and infinite reproducibility potential. Brea sees the digital image as a collapse of the traditional representational model. We are no longer producing reality or attempting to do so through the performance of symbols. Instead, data is a matrix of interrelations that produces subjects to play into its quantified reality. There is no longer an environment beyond information, as this interrelation intends to become the world itself. However, the development of this technological state of things is very much related to modern thought and its imperialist political project. The modern tradition of thought established a linear perception of time and history as a progressive evolution towards a so-called better future through conquering the environment rationally. The Cartesian plane, which champions rational mathematical awareness as the basis of subjectivity, is a foundational technology for the datification of the world. This aims to establish the division between experience and meaning as the objective foundation of a single monolithic truth that alienates humanity from its environment and eventually turns the world into a place and nature into resources. In this sense, the world becomes a map, taking for granted its availability for exploitation, regardless of whatever otherness may be sharing the same environment. This inherently creates a totalitarian hierarchy of information over experience. The political development of this technological approach has exploitation of otherness at its core. Ghosts can help us understand here how data, which is unable to capture the wholeness of experience, will always be biased towards an arbitrary intention of meaning. However, it is through this monolithic, apparently rational truth that the producers of data find a justification towards their expansion through the use of violence upon anything, being nature or cultures, that fall below their rational hierarchy. This bias is masked in the modern ideology through the illusion of universality. This example can be seen in so many dimensions. This can be seen in so many dimensions, and one example that survives to this day is the idea of the so-called discovery of the American continent. In Mexico, as I believe in many other Latin American countries, we were taught in the schools that the Spanish discovered America, as if many civilizations that existed with their own cosmotechnics had not already discovered their own territory. Another very obvious and superficial example is the way American entertainment tends to label certain events, such as sports or beauty pageants, as world championships, even when only a couple countries are represented, or the famous Miss Universe, or even the Ringling Bros. And Barnum and Bailey Circus, that is the greatest show on earth. These examples are very banal, but uncover the way Western white male subjectivity is projected towards the world as a taking for granted universality. This is also the case with modern science. In her essay, The Ghost in On the Machine, Magic Technology and the Modest Witness, Anne Cranny Francis tells the story of how sharing a ghost encounter with a female scientist led her to understand the way the figure of the allegedly modest witness, which is an apparently unbiased, impartial subject extracted from the natural phenomena it studies, is in fact a form of discrimination towards what can be validated as truly scientific and what can be disregarded as superstition, pseudoscience, etc. We can understand through her research that there is nothing modest about this witness. Instead, science is in fact an ideological device that works towards the further datafication of the world, biased towards this imperialistic subject. So how can ghost communication take place? We should be aware of how foundational narratives or ideologies lend to authoritarian abuse. Behind every tragic mass-scale abuse in history, there has been a monolithic discourse that has served as justification. This happened through an allegedly objective true religion producing the genocide of free-thinking women considered witches during the Inquisition. This happened with the genocide of so-called indigenous cultures in discovered America. This happened with allegedly objective race superiority in Nazi Germany, and this is happening nowadays through the allegedly objective free market in many, many forms. Donna Haraway, on her famous Cyborgs Manifesto, proposes hybridization as a form of resistance. In the center of hybridization relies awareness towards otherness. We cannot escape the technological panopticon that tries to impose a totalitarian data regime towards our experience. We are forced to take part in this machine. However, we can reclaim our agency starting with our own bodies. She sees becoming a cyborg, part human, part animal, part machine, as a way of unraveling the single narrative into a multiplicity through kinship and caring of others. In this sense, empathy and radical tenderness can disrupt the totalitarian objective truth. In this sense, ghosts as fluid entities challenge our notion of subjectivity. Ghosts disrupt a data-driven world as glimpses of nonlinear time, of non-rational knowledge, of non-human existence, of non-place environments. It is in their spectral and ambiguous natures that we can envision a form of subjectivity with otherness, one that acknowledges death up front and creates accountability for violence. So what do contemporary images have to do with ghosts? As ghosts exceed our symbolic intentions for meaning, contemporary ubiquitous images have created a spectral membrane that mediates our worldview. In so-called augmented reality, there is always more than meets the eye, quite literally. And while this, in a neoliberal sense, means that your every thought and action can be quantified and traced towards an attention economy, it is through hybridization and acknowledging of the presence of otherness that we can find a dimension even beyond datafication. It is through the excess of experience over meaning in the real beyond reality that we can acknowledge our current cosmotechnic as finite and not a monolithic truth. It is through the presence of ghosts that we are faced up front with our own extinction at all times. Can we escape this fate in the long run? Most likely not, but we can dream of a different end of the world. For this, however, we should really question the way in which monolithic truth has co-opted technology towards its destructive agenda. The development of information technologies has a very promising potential for the empowerment of civil society or the autonomy of communities, but the so-called free market has developed in the West a new feudal technological surveillance regime and a fully automated totalitarian regime in the East. Why is that, with artificial intelligence almost reaching the point of abolishing work, we are selling water reserves in the stock market on the expense of major droughts in the global south? Why do we envision technological progress as flying cars or space colonization, but not as the abolition of money and redistribution of wealth, obsolescence of fossil fuels, a truly open source knowledge database instead of intellectual property, and a big etc.? In the context of art, a very questionable category for this discussion, the first step for ghost communication is to open up the space for ghosts to speak. At the moment, art, with a capital A, is simply a reflection of the free market's data-driven regime that turns arbitrary assets into capital through collective speculation. Art has a place in our current system because it creates a discourse with which the market is able to expand its objective truth into that which science cannot understand. Things like intuition, taste, affection, and emotion play into the art market to create monetary value through the creation of stories. Contemporary art's emergence of the key figure of the curator is very symptomatic of this. Artistic devices need to be activated by entering a story, and curators are usually the storytellers that transport objects from the mundane to the sublime, from the ready-made to the auction room. So how can ghost communication take place? A good place to start would be storytelling. As I mentioned earlier, ghosts tend to appear with a message, an omen, or a wish for revenge. Sometimes they can contain all of those together. If ghosts are manifestations of nonlinear time, and they are ever more present in digital media, they must be trying to reach out. They must be wanting us to acknowledge that otherness is urgent in the context of a totalitarian, linear, and objective monolithic truth. In this sense, reclaiming time from its rationality should be the first step towards listening to ghosts. In a non-rational sense, looking back to history is also a way of looking into the future. Can we make kin with otherness to unravel our cosmotechnics out of their exploitative loops? What would art look like in a world without money? Can technological progress be more about participating in the Earth's ability to restore itself rather than to dig deeper into its insides just so that we can set them on fire? And how can ghost communication take place? So that was like the theoretical framework of my project, and I was also doing video collage last semester, and I wanted to show a video. No, TLC. Okay.
Human analysis of the human narrative? Can ghosts help us understand it? Ghost communication is a transmedia project that aims to produce a framework to understand our current relationship with images in the context of human-induced extinction. Some questions that were asked during this research were: what are the epistemological foundations for the non-human perspective? What is the relationship between ghosts and media? Is it possible to elaborate a non-human analysis of the human narrative? Can ghosts help us understand a way out of our modern cycle of destruction? How can ghost communication take place? Ghosts as an object of study can often be very elusive. Their key characteristic is partial, or even non-presence. They are always and/or both and. It is in their nature to go against linear thought. They have been around since the beginning of culture, but have always contained an experience that goes beyond human understanding. This form of being as otherness is in fact very relevant nowadays to understand images and technologies. Ghosts can be traced back to the origins of visual representation. It is a common interpretation for prehistoric cave paintings that images served a ritual or magical purpose. Gimbrick claims that cave paintings representing animals helped hunters obtain power over their prey, as if images were connected in some way to the soul. Contemporary semiotics would explain this magical relationship with the image as an example of the bilateral sign, a signifier that is unable to contain the wholeness of the signified. In this sense, the image attempts to capture something from the animal. In the example of the cave, that is beyond its
Para
physical
estas
form.
definiciones es crucial
This
reconocer al
attempt,
fantasma como
the
un fenómeno
performance of the
atemporal del
symbol,
alma en
is
relación
revealing
a
a
la
fully
muerte.
developed cosmotechnic.
Más allá de buscar
According to
producir una definición del
Yakui,
alma,
cosmotechnics
lo
can
cual
be
requeriría de un
understood as
estudio
the
en sí
pairing
mismo,
of
podemos
cosmology
utilizar
and
la teoría
technical
de Marx
devices that
para
emerge from
entenderla
turning
como
the
el dispositivo
environment into
central
an
de un
milieu,
medio.
its humanized
En el
understanding.
primer capítulo de
In the
Andrés
case of the
Media,
cave
McLuhan
paintings,
explica la
the cave
célebre
itself
idea,
is
el
no
medio es
longer
el
a
mensaje.
natural location but is now a
Aquí define a los
place,
medios
which is
más
a
allá del
technical
sentido
device.
tradicional que los entiende como el
However,
canal de un
the
contenido,
ritual
ya que al
aspect of the
analizar los
symbolic
contenidos de un medio
performance
solo
reveals a
encuentra más
central
medios.
device that fully rounds up the
Utiliza el
cosmotechnic
ejemplo del
aspect of
medio
the cave
impreso que
painting,
contiene
the
al medio
soul.
discográfico que contiene
The
a la
soul as
prosa,
a
que produce al
technology is
medio un
crucial for the
pensamiento lógico
development of
lineal.
culture. It
Describe
implies an
entonces a los medios
understanding of
como
the
una matriz de
existence of
interpretaciones
otherness and the
tecnológicas
dimension
que son a la
beyond.
vez extensiones de las
It is through
capacidades
the soul that a
sensoriales humanas y
divide is
medios de
created
producción
between
que generan
experience and
sensaciones
meaning,
existentes.
and therefore language and information are produced.
La primera relación entre
In this sense,
fantasmas,
symbols
H,
emerge not only from
hombre.
human will and intention,
Aquí se
but
mencionan
also
las
very
mismas.
much from their
Coutinho explica
environment
que la
manifesting
interpretación más
into the human
comúnmente aceptada de
experience.
estas imágenes es que fueron
However,
producidas
an
con una
important
intención
element of
mágica.
cosmotechnics, as it is
Servían
very
para
much
obtener poder
dependent
sobre
on
los
location,
animales.
is the idea of the
Como si la
multiplicity of
representación
technologies.
tuviera alguna relación con el
Sure,
alma, tanto
the
del
soul
pensador
may
que
be a
recibía el
constant
input como
technology
de
and
aquel
language
que
that
era
conforms to
generador de
culture,
energía.
but the relationship that this produces with the environment could vary from milieu to
Podríamos
milieu.
entender la cueva como un
To note
complejo
this is very
dinámico
important as it will help us understand modernity as a technological framework that could eventually
humana, que se estructuran siempre en un único eje y con un único sentido. Que se estructuran siempre en un único eje y con un único sentido. De ser posible un mundo real,
Este no necesariamente estaría sujeto a una espacio-temporalidad como la entendemos bajo los límites de nuestro lenguaje. Es por esto que el confinamiento del conocimiento a la lógica científica como forma ideológica ha producido la
Ghosts are
explicación
not necessarily the actual souls of the animals represented, but a phenomenon of the performance of symbols. In this excessive experience that the signifier is unable to contain or signify, there is a threefold element of ambiguity that haunts the process of representation. Ghosts are not necessarily souls. They have more to do with the fluidity with which they move beyond our grasp. In this sense, ghosts are not necessarily unified entities, but excess of meaning that circles through the earth due to the reverberation of symbolic performance. This could explain why ghosts are usually believed to carry a message, either event from actions in the past, or omens from the future. The ambiguity they produce with time is also a key element inherent to their nature. Ghosts can also be understood as glimpses of further dimensions of time that challenge our linear perception. Sailor Weir's new book on true theories dealing images describes the way the development of images from material-based to film to digital has shifted cosmologies over time, and therefore subjectivities, politics, etc. It is very interesting the way he describes the current state of digital images as specters due to their ubiquity and reproducibility.
Direccionalidad. De hecho, podríamos entender al fantasma como un efecto de tipo multidireccional
sobre el lenguaje o la comunicación humana. Estructuran siempre en un único eje.
Unidireccionalidad. De hecho, podríamos entender al fantasma como un efecto de tipo multidireccional sobre el
It is very interesting the way he describes the current state of digital images as specters due to their ubiquity and infinite reproducibility potential. Bree sees a digital image as a collapse of the traditional representational model. We are no longer producing reality, or attempting to do so, through the performance of symbols. Instead, data is a matrix of interrelations that produces subjects to play into its quantified reality. There is no longer an environment beyond information, as this interrelation intends to become the world itself. However, the development of this technological state of things is very much related to modern thought and its imperialist political project. The Cartesian plane, which champions rational mathematical awareness as the basis of subjectivity, is a foundational technology for the datafication of the world. This iteration of the soul as technology aims to establish the division between experience and meaning as the objective foundation of a single, monolithic truth that alienates humanity from its environment, and eventually turns the world into a place, and nature into resources. This inherently creates a totalitarian hierarchy of information over experience. The political development of this technological approach has exploitation of otherness at its core. Ghosts can help us understand here how data, which is unable to capture the wholeness of experience, will always be biased towards an arbitrary intention of meaning. However, it is through this monolithic, apparently rational truth that the producers of data find a justification towards their expansion through the use of violence upon anything, being nature or cultures, that fall below their rational hierarchy. This bias is masked in the modern ideology through the illusion of universality. This can be seen in so many dimensions. One example that survives to this day is the idea of the discovery of the American continent.
The discussion on Andrés' presentation will be afterwards as well. So we're moving on to our third speaker, David Revés. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, David.
Hello.
Thank you for meeting us here in a virtual format. David has a master in artistic studies, theory of art and art criticism from the Faculty of Fine Arts of Oporto. Is currently attending to the Master of Communication Sciences, Contemporary Culture and New Technologies at FCSH Nova, but is also an independent curator, critic, writer, researcher, and he, in this sense, he has already developed a lot of reflecting work. He has done some curatorial activity, namely of Michael Bieberstein, of Hugo Almeida Pinho, Terarara, among others. So he's also developing critical essays, critical reflection through publication, interventions, and so on. David is going to propose a reflection departing from The Mesh and the Circle, a film from 2014 from Mariana Caló and Francisco Queimadela. And following what he has told us, he's going to elaborate on the idea of the hand as an agency, of its possibility of creating a world, but also on the possible spectrology of an archaic relationship between human and the world that comes up through the film, and how it could create a real, which I think it would be an interesting reflection to follow up afterwards. Thank you, David, once again. I'll pass on to you.
Sorry, my internet fell. So can you hear me? and see me? Yeah? Okay. So I will start my essay. Okay. The hands that control the fire and work the glass, the hands that massage the face, that heal, the hands that mold the clay, the hands that paints, the hands that weave a rug, the hands that ring a bell, hands that aid speech, the gestures of hands that carry and transduce them, the hand that writes. The Mesh and the Circle, a film by the Portuguese duo Mariana Caló and Francisco Queimadela, shows us insinuating transformative and productive hands, uplifting and pacifying hands, expressive ones, hands that articulate the individual's relationship with the natural and constructed reality, as well as with other similar bodies, hands that being corporeal matter create a world that are operative, shaping, and symbolic instruments. From the images of hands that are shown in this film, and which constitute testimonies of almost archaic human activities in their daily creative technique indispensable to the human edifice, a brief history of the hand could be deduced. An history that would give us an account of the role of the hand, not only as an aid to the entire technical apparatus, but also as the root of the very understanding of what is human, setting in motion what could be called an anthropological machine, that is, the engine of the historical becoming of man, to quote Giorgio Agamben. It is then the figure of Prometheus and of his hand in action that would be outlined in this history as a matrix of a hand that has expanded its prehensive and organizational shadow throughout the real, the genesis of an agglutinating technoscientific rationality superimposed on the whole experienced world, and which would be consolidated more intensely in the modern ideal of the superiority of the human being over all sensible. However, in the mesh in the circle, if the mesh in the circle makes this image possible, it also paradoxically refutes it. Something exists in this film that triggers a shock, a shudder, of the gaze, of the body, of consciousness, instituting itself as a certain phantasmatic presence that continually mobilizes, but which at the same time disempowers us. Still, this presence will not exclusively concern other images of the hand that are interspersed in the fragmented filmic narrative, images that appear between plans of the hand's techniques and the techniques products of the hand. We speak here, for example, of the hand that picks a fruit, of the hand that moves the surface of the water, of the hand that resists in a hand-to-hand fight. These hands that represent a more direct mediation with the matter and the bodies, supposing to be freer from an intermediary technological matrix or a symbolic intentionality attributable to a guiding reason. In the same way, that phantasmatic presence will not yet refer to the hands that have apparently withdrawn from this film after having operated on all images of the hand we witness. That is, these apparently visible hands of the artists of filming, editing, sound manipulation, the hands that led the desire to see and hear. Perhaps what destabilizes us is exactly the unity of all these hands, whose recognition is inscribed in a constant haptic effect that reveals as a futuristic retroactivity. Because if Caló and Camedala do not fail in this film to show a certain prevalence of the individual handholder over the real, they also presuppose a certain horizontality in the relation between the individual and the tangible environment, stating for that the brain is hand and the hand is brain. Even so, as if contradicting everything that was left behind, or speculating on the basis of its more radical powers, it will be the same authors that in the end of the film do not prevent themselves from leaving the question open. If we find the will, we break free of time. If the answer of this question is not given to us expressly through discourse, its latency is what the mesh and the circle weave through its entire imagery, making us enter a strange restlessness, similar to the Freudian state of unheimlich. So, so that we can sketch an answer to that question, or more clearly touch this phantasmatic presence, we shall look with greater determination at the powers of the hand, surpassing it as a narrative theme or as a technical symbolic mechanism, in order to find its primary speculative vocation, eminently materialistic and as such phenomenological. The human hand, everything it can tell us is always in some way fragmentary. Wherever it reveals to us is always in some way unpredictable. Between the matter that it touches, forming practically the world it creates as organic projection, simple grasping, or technical imprisonment, and the pure sensible apticity, the hand lives in a state of absolute possibility. As Paul Valéry asked, at the same time instrumental, symbolic, oratory, calculator, universal agent, could we not classify it as an organ of the possible? We could, indeed. But for what we are interested in exploring here, we must first realize that the mark of this infinite possibility cannot be reduced to a mere instrumental operability or symbolic agency, precisely because the hand, in its primitive organicity, destabilizes all the dynamics of these relational planes. The experience of the hand, of a latency constantly being remade and updated, is an expression of an internal conflict that can revel at any moment, but where the intensity of this evasion has already been successfully mitigated by the human reason and its technical scientific apparatuses. Because the hand, as a unique possession of man, but a possession that disempowered himself, to use the terms of Jean Paul, can develop as a permanent agency to a radical exteriority that allowing us to conceive, or at least to experiment, a plan where the cosmological superiority of the human is strongly shaken. Therefore, we face here an understanding of the hand as a constituted and constituent agent of the real, an integral part of its totality and generative force, while it brings, and for you to use the terms of Jean Paul again, inscribed in itself the weight of the world and the past, like a letter that encourages to decipher the different itineraries that its owner followed. End of quote. This happens, and we can affirm it, even if that letter is already too corrupted by the entire symbolic layer on which the hand is constrained and where its action could be predictable as well as desirable. To remove then all the symbolic layer, we will therefore have to presuppose another type of itinerary, one that refers to a certain ancestral empiricism, where the figure of a phenomenal hand was drawn, still free from any operational constraint or guiding reason, for the hand may even be beyond the individual history of his holder. When touching and being touched, when resisting and offering resistance, when transforming and being transformed, the hand awakens to a background of essential primary feedback established with reality, an absolute background that stands out in the gestures of the hand as a trace or even as a kind of practical anamnesis that detonates a closed self within himself and within the world that he has built. I now invoke an excerpt of the poem called Beforehand by the Portuguese poet Herbert Welder. The translation is mine. The hand instigating the writing straight, It touches all of you. You touch the ground through it. The earth trembles when you touch it. Everything is transmitted and transformed. From this brief excerpt, what we can perceive is that moment of destabilization, disempowering indifference, a Derridian difference, if you like, that takes the whole body and makes it experience beyond its limits an absolute out of itself, where something is produced in the gap opened by the hand. As the poem shows, the earth shakes, and the hand shakes with it. Therefore, there is here a certain familiarity, that of nature's own productivity, that is of the real, in whose transformative tectonics the hand participates and to which it contributes. This happens because the human hand, even operating there, precedes not only the whole human symbolic apparatus, but also all the reflexivity of thought and subjectivity, establishing a direct route to this original background of pure productivity, where the distance between human and nature was not yet realized. But if it is certain that an anthropological paleontology, such as that of Andrés Leroy would place the agency of all activities and products of the hand precisely as competitors for the transformation of the individual physiological characteristics and the consequent increase of its cerebral capacities in a slow process of technical and psychic subjectivation based on an original technicity, where the hand would then take the lead by developing a mutual retroaction between consciousness and its surroundings. Even so, the possibility of being able to conceive the expressiveness of this original and ancestral background that the hand can still transport and make appear would not fail to send us back to a state of the world in which subjectivity and objectivity were still totally indistinguishable. It is this world which was not yet a world, an Umwelt for the human, that Gilbert Simondon had addressed when referring to a state of primitive magical unity between the human and the real, quoting Simondon. Primitive magical unity is the relation of the vital connection between man and the world, defining a universe that is at once subjective and objective prior to any distinction between the object and the subject. One can conceive of the primitive mode of man's relation to the world as prior not only to the objectivation of the world, but even to the segregation of objective units in the field that will be the object field. Man finds himself linked to a universe as a medium. End of quote. We could then assume that within this dimension of the pure sensible materiality that Simondon talks about, we would not yet have the experience of the human as we conceive it, and lived it by a self-reflective consciousness, that is, a thought that knows, that thinks. What would come to overcome this world, subjecting mediation and changing the mode of relation, would be precisely the appearance of the technical object for which the hand was decisive, that would install a distance between the human and the real, corresponding precisely to all the symbolic value. And then would follow that, and all that would follow that moment, therefore, would be the entry of the real and the individual in the time and history of the human, and consequently, the later's increasing domination over the free forces of those. However, we must not forget, the hand is still matter, the hand is attached to the earth, it falls and shudders on it. We saw it with Herbert Welder. The hand is a telluric matter, sharing that original and maternal strength of the earth matter, even though it is unquestionable that the earth is also the stage where the hand was made and is continually made. Let us now make an imaginative effort and think of the amazement and astonishment, not yet processed as such, of the primitive human and even of his antecedents, given the glimpse that The activity of his hands resulted in productions in everything different from what you would expect to receive from nature. That is, that his hands had the power to change and add the real in the same way that it articulates and rearticulates itself freely. Therefore, if we invoke the images brought by Leroy Bourin and Simondon, it is because from them we can imagine this other image locating the latent ballast of that original experience that we are looking for, that of the hand that being a parcel of and strength of the real participates in it, transforming it and transporting it in a pure state. How then could we establish a direct route in contemporary times to that distant experience of the hand that being earth matter brings the real with it? We could say through art and artist's productive gesture. In 1947 text, The First Man Was an Artist, Bartlett Newman stated the artist's gesture as a human birthright. As he said, man's hand traced the stick through the mud to make a line before he learned to throw the stick as a javelin. In The Praise of Hands, Faucillon text about the hand and its importance in the art system, the author would go even further. And I quote, though in one of its aspects, the artist is perhaps the most highly evolved of all times, prehistoric man nonetheless continues to persist in him. To the artist, the world is ever fresh and new. He examines it. He enjoys it with senses sharper than those of a civilized man, and he keeps alive the sense of magic in the unknown, and above all, the sense that his hands are instruments both of poetry and industry. They are the instrument of creation even before they are an organ of knowledge. End of quote. From here, we can see that the hand, and especially the artist's hand, opens up a territory of contradictory tensions, where the first fire has not stopped burning, where all the mystery of the real endures and is continually updated. Perhaps for this reason, Marcel Duchamp referred to the artist as, and I quote him now, a mediumistic being who from the labyrinth beyond time and space opened his way to a clearing. This clearing, however, will not fail to be close to the opening space established by the work of art where Heidegger would see a polarized fight between the world and the earth. In this battle between the world, let us call symbolic, and the earth, let us call the real, the world is founded on the earth, and the earth breaks through the world, to use the words of the German philosopher. It is this outburst that interests us. It is in line what Elizabeth Gross would mean by art enables matter to become expressive. For the author, this matter is therefore the earth. It is the real, that is, the set of cosmological forces that can also be understood as a kind of utter chaos before any form of subjectivity, and that art brings as a reduplication of these forces, albeit in a regulated way to make them accessible to the sensible experience. Therefore, if this author is firmly based on the thought of Deleuze and Guattari, perhaps from this point we can understand what these two authors would mean when they say that, and I quote, art captures a piece of chaos in a frame to form a composite chaos that becomes sensible, end of quote. And we don't let of hearing an Heideggerian echo here. However, all this ballast came from behind, namely from Nietzsche, and from an understanding on the part of this author that human activities never cease to be a way of printing certain lines of regularity on chaos, bringing it with them in these gestures. For paradoxically, for Nietzsche, chaos is, as Heidegger tried to explain on his lessons about that author, and I quote, the name of embodied life, life as a large-scale embodied vector, the veiled state of the untamed wealth of becoming and the flow of the world in its entirety. It is, in this sense, the sensation of this flow that Deleuze and Guattari speak of, and it is the experience of this flow of creative life that the hand and art through the hand, and hand through art make possible. It is the reduplication and multiplication of life, of its permanent birth, that art and hand allow the human to produce, as productive matter that introduces itself and lives before and within history. Because, to deviate and adapt here the sense of a passage from Bragança de Miranda, the hand has the same mechanics as physics, its absolute productivity. The haptic sensation, pure touch, which a work of art produces in us, which disarms and disempowers us, which breaks all symbolic maps, is both the experience of the image that we see, as well as the distant hand of the artist that reaches us through it. It is also the productive experience of the freest life, of the real in its pure state. This is the will of the hand, the will of life, before and beyond time. So let's back to the film by Caló and Camabella. We have now met the ghost we are chasing. He is the real, the chaos that always haunts the human experience, that is beyond it, and that the hand cuts and tries to stabilize through art. This ghost inhabits this film in a double way: in the hand that is its theme, and in the creative gesture that has created the film as an artwork. If a certain restlessness of ours, however, gets thicker and thicker, if we recognize ourselves in it, it is because the ghost also inhabits us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. I would like to invite the present speakers to join me here to open the debate. So for the audience that is following us through Zoom or Facebook, we are now open to questions. Our staff will pay attention to the written ones. I would just like to do a very small general comment on the three presentations, which I once again thank very much. They were all very interesting with a lot of common aspects. I would say that all the three have in common a certain programmatic tone reacting to ontological, epistemological discourses or way of functioning, way of conceiving and presenting the world that can unfold itself in several aspects of domination. Either it is knowledge, women, nature, body, gender in general, and all in common in very different ways, of course, but have the envision of a possibility of awakening through the ghost, or what stands here as a metaphor of a ghost, something that disrupts, something that we can kill, as in your case, something that disrupts in the sense that fragments all the monolithic discourse as you posed it, or as in the case of the hand, following David, in the case of the creative hand, and I thought about Anna Adderley and surrealistic experiences of refusing with the hand all its productive apparent destination. So a non-productive hand to be a creative and then powerful hand. Well, a lot to go on. But through the disruption, whether it is real, non-real, by dismissing the human domination, anthropology, things. So I have one specific question to each one of you, but instead of monopolizing the debate, I will open to the audience here and to the public in virtual form. So Is there any question for the moment? Not yet. Okay, virtually. So my suggestion is, and we don't have much time to be true, we are going to start our afternoon sessions at 2:30 with the keynote speaker Margarida Medeiros, which means that we have a short period of time to debate now. So my suggestion is to pose a question to each one of you and then to give you time to answer. Is that okay? So I mean, I could pick up in so many things. It was so interesting. And in the beginning, when I was introducing you, I didn't mention the key aspect that I was referring to, the fact of being a mother and claiming that in your SMILE bio, which I found really interesting and really with an affinity with the artistic work. But picking up in the Deleuze and Guattari quotation that you mentioned about the masks, about not hiding, I want you to comment on the fact that despite the fact it's not hiding, it's still operating in a paradox and controversial field of being visual and being viewed and not being viewed, right? In the sense that it's an appearance, as we were talking about earlier this morning. It appears itself, it's there, but it's a conflictual visibility and used as a mechanism, thinking about the objects or the mask, not only the mask, I'm enlarging this idea to the closet or to other devices or to the iron, where the cut of another subaltern figure there is not visible. So if you could just comment on the prevalence of this paradox of visibility and non-visibility. Regarding Andrés, I mean, there was a lot to say, of course, and it's sometimes really unfair that this so rich and so effervescent, right? Because they are ongoing researchers, have not much time to be debated. So as far as I recall from your abstract, you are producing a device, right? Kind of. Okay, so I would like you to speak a bit more on that. If that could represent a solution or part of a solution that also follows what you have told us, and if you don't fear the risk of developing any kind of device or even using images as you did in your project, recurring into the programmatic aesthetics of already subsumed to a capitalist logic of technologies. If I don't know if I'm making it clear. We are talking about mechanisms of free choice, mechanisms of snap images, or of presenting the images, of doing the visual effects and so on. And all of that is already, even if just apparently in some cases, it's already subsumed by the at least capitalist aesthetics, okay? But I also wanted to give you a reference of an author, I don't know if it's familiar to you, Warren Neidish. We had a lecture of him 2 weeks ago, I think, and he was discussing the cognitive capitalism, and following that he presented an idea connected with neuroscience of what can we do with the images today and with the access of the visual effects and so on to our brain to try to disturb this very plausible subsumption under a big logic of information. And for David, and finishing, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much. For David, I don't know if you want to comment a bit more on that, on the creative hand. I mean, there would be a lot to talk about, but sometimes we need a bit more time to organize ideas. But yeah, that idea of non-reflecting on what you are doing, not having control, how besides from the film you were talking about, how some artistic experiences provoke that idea through a kind of inhabitants of a phantom, and then like a cadavre exquis, for instance. Okay.
Thank you, Maria, again. And well, that's an interesting question, and it's great we have more time to try and quickly talk about more aspects, because Leticia's parents' work and Virginia, they have enormous uprising aspects that we can bring for today for us to reflect about many conditions, not only females, but also things that overdrawn us, and well. And going straight to your question about the invisible, I think there's something on both artists that they do directly with forces that they appear invisibly as invisible, but they are present, latent in objects around them, as in Virginia Spence, and like this figure that we don't see the angel, but it's present everywhere. Also in Parentes, household objects, we don't see, she doesn't, straightly points out, and it's what is the invisible force that's around there that we can call oppressive, dictatorship, or maybe even women's ideals. But she operates in the visible side to comment on the invisible, and that's the aspect that caught me. And to think about the image that she produces as a sort of a result of this dealing with these invisible forces. And I thought it was interesting on the first debate that we had today, when they talked about the objects and how they carry traces about there's a history around it. And then I think that's they're dealing with that in the present, like dealing with the presence of these traces and how they actually bodily affect them. And I think that's the comment that I have for it. And I hope I answered.
Yeah, so about devices, I think that nowadays we cannot really produce any devices that won't be permeated by the logic of our current system. But I believe the idea of this research is maybe to like introduce hybridization in terms of there could be like a little seed of something else, or at least also doing some artist reviews. I also studied the way in which artists, I don't know, such as Hito Steyerl, she creates like, I believe for me she's like the representation of the cyborg in the terms of she's full on the art market and like #1 most popular artist nowadays in contemporary. But in a way, her being in the art market is like a counter device against itself, so because her work is all about critique and dismantling the way it works. So that kind of contradictory and bilateral ways of working is something that really inspires me and interests me in terms of creating. And so what I would like to go on with this project is a video game that is more locally focused on Mexico, because Mexico City was built on lakes, and there was a technology before the conquest that I would like to speculate upon for the future, because it was a technology that allowed for people to harvest crops on top of the lake. And they also, in the Mexican territory, there was a agricultural technological device called milpa, which in the same piece of land you could grow corn and chili and beans and pumpkins. So in a very small piece of land you had, and they were all symbiotically connected, and it was a technological creation, because all of those plants were domesticated. So in a sense, I would like to make a not sort of speculative fiction about that technology on the lake, because then the lake went with the conquest. This technology was like thrown away, and then the lake was dried, and now the city is sinking, and also it's very susceptible to earthquakes. So just 2 days ago, the one part of the metro collapsed. So, and that is also because of corruption, but also because of the same structure of the city. So I would like to go on with this project, making a video game. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
So the creative gesture, isn't it? Yeah. Well, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. It, I see you as a mise en abîme almost. So, well, I was trying to establish a way of, through the creative gesture, to try to find a primitive past or primordial experience where where the gesture is concerned as a, it goes beyond human, actually, beyond the old history of human. You can find it as a productive force, as well as species in chaos and becoming chaos. So yeah, that was the point, and I actually I found very interesting the reference of yours of thinking of an athlete, because when I wrote this essay, I was thinking in her practice too, and the way she evolves and works in the symbolic, but trying to overpass the symbolic and try to radicalize the way of the hand moves and our languages, our tongue moves too, and to speak. So yeah, yeah, that's it mainly. Thank you.
So I think we have 5 more minutes. Is there any question? Yeah, João Pedro.
I have a question. It's more of it's a comment and question for Andrés, because during the morning, throughout all the morning, we've been talking on how cinema, art, and ghosts in general have more than copies or marks of reality. They have their own reality, and they have a particular relation with reality. And you mentioned Donna Haraway, and Donna Haraway has talked about this need for stories that can express our predicament in a complex, not linear and not monolithic, but in a very complex way. And more than that, that can do it in a on an optimist way. That's why, for instance, she criticizes the idea of Anthropocene, because she thinks it's already a pessimistic concept. And for that reason, I would like to ask you, because there is this, it's an old but it's still very vibrant discussion on what's the role of artistic practices in shaping everyday life and shaping our reality, if we wish. And I would like to ask you, what's your personal take as an artist researcher of what you think that is the place of artistic practices in this process of hybridization, and if, for instance, this hybridization that you mentioned about Ito Steyer, this compromise, if you wish, if it can be more effective, if you think it can be more effective in affecting the change. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think that what I envision for, well, not me, but like what I like about other things that I have researched is the role of community in art. So, for example, we just this semester we saw in the Facultad de Bellas Artes de Lisboa a little of the work of George Masiunas, who sort of grounded the place for a different kind of art that was not based on maybe one person or like, and in a way he could, through his movement of the Fluxus movement, he could, well, it was not his in that sense, but create a platform for collaboration in a way in which every artist, such as Yoko Ono or John Cage, would still be their own thing and brand or whatever, but they work together, collaborating in creating a broader sense of what the art experience can be. And in that sense, what for me is exciting about art is everything that goes outside of the realm of monetary exchange. So in that sense, I believe Hito Steril's work is already very effective in that sense, because she produces theoretical research and also visually engaging work. I am also very optimistic about interactive media, because I believe participation and including other people into the work, even though this semester, well, these last 2 semesters, I have been perceiving in my school like a little reluctancy towards interactive media because of, I believe, a 90s critique of how interactivity was not really democratic. But I don't think, in the first place, democratic should be like the goal too, but also interactivity can open up to much more other things. So that's what I'm excited about.
I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your questions. Thank you very much. We'll see each other at 2:30 again with Margarida Medeiros' lecture. Okay, thank you.